Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of the Card Combo Show, where I look at weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. This week I'm going to be looking at Opus 12 Y'shtola, Opus 11 Orphan, Opus 6 Firion, Opus 12 Jegran, and Opus 12 Layle. Righto, Y'shtola, she's one of those fancy multi-element forwards. So she is a Wind Earth 3-cost 9k forward, and this I think is one of the best examples of how multi-element forwards aren't really a drawback. The fact that, I know she's a legend, but she has the text Haste. If Y'shtola is dealt damage less than her power, the damage becomes 0 instead, and Y'shtola cannot be blocked by forward of cost 4 or more. That's insanely powerful, and she's a 9k as standard. I don't know what to tell you, like normally an 8k would have been over the curve, but she's a 9k over the curve. And yeah, let's look at the ways you can mess around with her. Phoenix, being able to tech her in obviously is very nice. You can have her just thrown into your mono fire deck if you really wanted, just for some extra aggression and horribleness. But yeah, just on your opponent's turn, you Phoenix, you break one of their forwards, you then bring in Y'shtola ready to swing on your next turn as well. Caius. So when Caius enters the field, you may play one character of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. So being able to play Caius into Y'shtola, you've then got two forwards which are way over their mark in power. Now obviously Caius does have the text of when Caius is put from the field into the break zone, select one character you control, put it into the break zone, but you can work that to your own benefit if you've got backups that you're willing to break to get effects from them, or you could just be running the 5-cost unit backup where if a forward's put into the break zone you can remove it from the game, thereby negating Caius' effect. But either way, paying 4 to gain 2 9k forwards, one with haste and a Minwo effect, that's really, really good. Chelenka, so making it so that Y'shtola can attack twice and also gains Brave as well as Haste is awesome. So yeah, there's plenty of ways you can do this, but maybe you played Caius into Y'shtola and then you play Chelenka. So then Y'shtola's got Haste and Brave and you've got two forwards and she's got Minwo, and wow, that's a lot to develop in one turn for your opponent to have to deal with. Momody, so as I mentioned before, obviously giving her Brave would be horrible, but giving her Brave every turn would be even worse, because then she's also a decent blocker for you, and she has a Minwo effect, so she can block 8Ks and not suffer the consequences. But if she does block something that has higher power than herself, just employ the help of Seaguard, where she would reduce the damage she takes by 1 anyway. And one of the good things about cards like Seaguard is with these multi-element forwards, is that multi-elements will start to be able to bridge elements and still be able to get the effects of cards. So for example, if you had the Earth Buffer Ingus and the Earth Buffer Arc forwards on your field, Y'shtola would gain both of those buffs. So it applies to backup buffs as well, like things like Lulu, but I figured you're not going to have too many elemental buffers in your backup lineup, but forwards you could do. And yeah, so this is where having multi-element forwards with cards that would otherwise be in mono-element decks, but actually in multi-element decks, will really come in beneficial. So yeah, having the likes of Seaguard with Y'shtola is powerful. Obviously, you can do a similar sort of thing with Cecil as well. So if it were to take damage, so say Y'shtola was going to take 12k, you can use Cecil to negate 4k of that damage, and then the remainder just gets reduced to 0 because of Y'shtola's standard Minwo effect. Orphan. When Orphan enters the field, or at the beginning of the attack phase during each of your turns, quick clarification, each of your turns means the player that controls Orphans. When they changed the wording a little bit, they said each of your turns, it makes it sound like each of the player's turns. It's not the case, it's each of the controller of the card's turns. Each of your turns, choose up to 2 forwards or monsters your opponent controls, place 1 Doom counter on them, then break all the characters with 3 or more Doom counters placed on them. So that does mean in one turn you can play Orphan, they gain Doom counters, you move to attack phase, they gain another set of Doom counters, so then they're already close to death anyway. And it's once Orphan enters the field and at the beginning of the attack phase that it checks for the Doom counters to break as well. So it's those 2 points that the break effect would happen. So let's say hypothetically Orphan came in, applied the Doom counters, that would then check for how many Doom counters there are, and they would then be broken if they have enough, or not if not. It's at that point as the opponent would want to break Orphan, because being able to break Orphan, or breaking Orphan after the check has happened but the third counters are placed, even though Orphan has been broken, the ability is on the stack, and therefore you would want to break him before he does another check. So Lightning, being able to play Orphan onto the field and in one turn gain 2 Doom counters on 2 forwards, but then also giving Orphan haste is really useful. Obviously, even in ice, you want to make sure that those forwards are dulled, because if you're just attacking with Orphan, then the chances are your opponent's either going to just sacrifice the forward you've placed a Doom counter on, or, you know, possibly block and break Orphan, at which point Orphan isn't going to get those third Doom counters on the forwards or monsters. Magic Pot. Yeah, so obviously Orphan can enter the field, Doom counter, go to attack phase. More Doom counters. You can then Magic Pot Orphan into another of itself to bring in the third set of Doom counters to then break something. As I mentioned before, it checks for the Doom counters on entry and the start of the attack phase, and even if you're in your attack phase, you can Magic Pot to bring in Orphan, and that will then check, oh yeah, you've got 3 Doom counters, I'm breaking those 2 forwards. Now you can also combine this with Lightning, so again, still in your attack phase, you've put 3 Doom counters on 2 of your opponent's forwards, they now break, you can then use Lightning to give Orphan haste and deal a point of damage. Obviously, you can combo this with this Orphan as well, so when Orphan enters the field, choose up to 2 forwards your opponent controls, dull them. If you control 5 or more ice characters, freeze them also. When Orphan attacks, choose 1 forward your opponent controls, freeze it. So maybe this Orphan has been on, the 5-cost Orphan's been on the field long enough to have broken some things. You could say your opponent's got no forwards, you can attack with Orphan. You can then Magic Pot to bring in this Orphan. If they did have some forwards, but they were dull or something, or they weren't dull even, you can use Orphan to dull them out. You can also use them to freeze if you've got a nice enough ice characters. Again, you can use the backup Lightning to give this Orphan haste, and then when it attacks, it can freeze a forward as well. So you can effectively get 2 attacks from the same forward, so to speak, using Lightning and Magic Pot, which I think is hilarious fun. Une, yeah, so just being able to flicker it as well, that's probably the easiest and strongest way to be able to get 2-3 Doom counters on a forward. You play Orphan, you then go to attack phase, 2 more Doom counters, and then cast a summon, flicker Orphan, more Doom counters, break the forwards. Firion, so he is a 4-cost 8k. If you control a Job Rebel forward, the cost for playing Firion onto the field is reduced by 2. If your opponent controls 3 or more forwards, Firion gains plus 1000 power and haste, and put 1 back up into the break zone until the end of the turn. Firion gains First Strike and Brave. So he would obviously be played alongside the likes of the Guy forward, or, you know, there's a new Ice Fire Leon forward as well, which he'd work nicely with. But the fact that he becomes a 2k 8k can be really 2CP AK, sorry, is really useful, but he's got some decent abilities anyway. RG, so you can put RG into the break zone. So let's say you play Firion to the field for 2 CP because you already control the Guy. You can then break RG. RG can then choose to give Firion haste, and then Firion now has First Strike, Brave, and haste, all just from breaking RG. Fusoya. So again, you can break Fusoya to give Firion First Strike and Brave, and obviously you can use this on your turn or on your opponent's turn. It doesn't matter when, but the good thing about Fusoya is the fact that he can also, when he's put into the break zone, he'll get you a character, a forward from your break zone, and you can add it to your hand, which is really, really useful. If that is on your turn, you may be able to play that forward as well. You know, maybe you can even play Fusoya and then immediately break him with Firion. If Firion's been on the field for a turn already, you can then attack with Firion, and maybe your opponent's going to go on forward, a big forward, but it's taken 5k damage from Fusoya, and you put Fusoya into the break zone to get yourself another forward, and your opponent has to deal with the fact that you've got a First Strike Brave forward, and their forward has taken 5k. Rampair, of course I was going to talk about Rampair, but I'm not going to talk about the Fable forward it always goes with. I'm only going to talk about Lightning and Fire forwards, just to kind of keep it in the right vein. But yeah, when Rampair's put from the field to the break zone, you may play 1 category 11 forward from your hand onto the field. So Vulcan. Maybe, again, Firion's been on the field a turn, but your opponent's got one nice big forward that you can't get around. You break ground pair, Firion has First Strike and Brave, and you can bring in Volker. Volker would then make it so that forward cannot block, and Volker's also really good because if your opponent does block, say they've got two forwards that you make it so one can't block, they block with the other one, you can then use Volker's S, choose one blocking forward, break it, and I absolutely love Volker's S because it doesn't matter who's attacking, who's blocking, whatever, what turn, just if there's a blocking forward and you want it to be broken, use Volker's S and it only costs one card. Archangel. So you could break ground pair to bring an Archangel, and you're in fire, or you're fire lightning, so there's plenty of easy ways to be able to give Archangel haste as well, and you just go swinging with a brave First Strike Firion and a big Archangel. Celtaeus. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's got ice in it as well, but it can still be played in mono fire or lightning fire if you really wanted. But yeah, when Celtaeus enters the field, remove up to five fire forwards and or ice forwards, so you don't have to remove any ice forwards, it can just be only fire, and you can get rid of 5 fire forwards and it would still apply. From the break zone from the game, then reveal the top 5 cards from your deck, play one forward of cost equal to or less than the number of removed cards among them onto the field, and return the other cards to the bottom deck in any order. So again, if you are in lightning fire, even though you've only removed fire cards from your break zone, you can still play a lightning forward onto the field. And Goomba, obviously you put Goomba into the break zone, you search out the Goomba, play it onto the field dull, just a nice little combo, and it can work with a lot of fire cards, also a lot of ice cards as well. Thordan, when Thordan's put into the break zone, you get to draw yourself a card. He's a fantastic EX that finds you the card you need. He's not a bad backup, especially with the likes of Firion, because you also get to recoup some of his value as well. Okay, Jegran. When Jegran enters the field, you may search for one job princess of cost 3 or less and play it onto the field. He's a I'll get there eventually. A 6 CP 8k forward, so he's under par, but he does search something and play onto the field, and consistency is one of the most important factors to consider when you're making a deck. So yeah, obviously Ovalia would be the first card I go to. Having this Jegran Ovalia play makes it worth just having at least Jegran in your Knight deck. At the very least, just putting lightning into your Knight deck, because being able to just get Ovalia there as soon as you can with Jegran is awesome, and that effectively makes Jegran a 9k forward. Ash. Ash can be a very troublesome forward to deal with. When Ash is chosen by a summoner ability of your opponent, Ash gains plus 3000 power until the end of the turn. To pay 2 water, activate Ash, so you know that's some decent abilities there. She's got a good S as well, but you combine this with the likes of Razzler. The card name Ash you control cannot be broken by opposing summon's abilities that don't deal damage, so your opponent now has to rely on either removing Ash, which you know obviously is quite limited, a board wipe, or having to deal her damage, but obviously when she takes damage, that damage will be, or she'll gain plus 3000 power, which if you combine with something like Minwoo, becomes even more troublesome. And gaining plus 2 forwards off of, gaining another forward off of Jegran, one of which is very troublesome, is really useful. Garnet, so a similar sort of thing, bring another forward onto the field. Garnet cannot be chosen by your opponent's summons, so kind of awkward to get rid of, but also when you cast a summon, all the forwards you control gain plus 1000 power until the end of the turn. There's loads of good summons you can combo this with, but just being able to play any summon and all your forwards get bigger, that combined with Ovalia means that your knights can become very formidable. Althea. So when Althea enters the field, choose one character other than Althea you control, activate it. So being able to use Althea to return a forward back to your hand as well is very useful. Especially in Knight deck, you can be using that alongside the types of like Gawain, where he can search you some forwards, or Beatrix, where you can play her to gain more buffs. But ultimately, you can play Althea onto the field alongside Jegran, and that can reactivate something, maybe a forward that's already attacked this turn, or just a backup whose ability you want to reuse. And then obviously Beatrix, because she can reduce Jegran's cost by 2, which means he's a 4 CP at that point, and he's on curve. You can then play Jegran to bring in any of the aforementioned cards or something else, and that's just incredibly good value. Okay, Layle. He is a 4 CP AK. Yes, did it. When a Layle or a forward enters your field, place 1 bearer counter on Layle, remove 3 bearer counters from Layle, choose 1 forward, remove it from the game. You can only use his ability whilst Layle is attacking. So he's got a very powerful ability, provided he stays on the field. So, Strago. You can play Strago, bounce your opponent's forward. You can then play another forward. That's 2 forwards played. Layle now should have 3 counters, because obviously he gains a counter from himself entering as well. So maybe Layle's been there a turn, you then place Drago into something that bounces a forward, Layle can attack and remove a forward as well, so your opponent started the turn with 2 forwards and now they have no forwards on the field. Layle and Orphan. So obviously you can play Layle to play Orphan onto the field. Orphan will search you any character from your deck, which is incredibly good value because of the fact you're effectively paying 1 CP for 2 forwards. 2 forwards that also count towards Layle's ability, and again Layle gains a counter from himself. So just like before, Layle's been on the field a turn. He's got 1 counter, these 2 come onto the field, he's now got 3 counters. You attack with him, remove something, and you've gained something to hand, which is really useful as well. Vanille. So the good thing about Vanille is that it can be on your opponent's turn. You could block with Vanille, she gets put into the break zone. You can then search for a Hecatonchia, remove it from the game, bring her back onto the field. When she re-enters, that will give Layle a counter as well. Similar sort of thing with Kadaj as well. If you do choose to remove Kadaj at the end of your turn, at the end of your opponent's turn, he'll re-enter the field. That will give Layle a counter, and the great thing about this card as well is that every turn that Kadaj re-enters and Layle is on the field, you'll be gaining a counter on Layle. So let's say Kadaj enters the field every turn with Layle there, and every turn you play a forward, which is obviously pretty good going, and if it's going that well for you, probably already won. But yeah, either way, to be able to consistently keep getting counters on Layle every turn is very powerful. Lightning, so similar to the others, you play Layle into the field, Layle gains a counter at the end of your turn, she comes back to hand, which means that next turn you can play her again. What's also good is that if Layle's got 2 counters, you play Lightning, he can attack, remove something, Lightning can then swing through, and then the turn she comes back to hand, and you're ready to start regenerating those counters. So let's say you had Lightning and Kadaj, every turn you're able to gain 2 counters on Layle, which is super useful. Magic Pot. Obviously, I love this card. Magic Pot is one of my favourite cards in this game. But as I said earlier, you can play a forward onto the field, it can have its effects happen. You can then Magic Pot to bring in another forward of the same name, and that means that Layle has effectively gained 2 counters for you playing 1 forward and using Magic Pot's ability. Obviously, you want to be careful not to overuse this ability, because you are ultimately putting a forward you control into the break zone, so you're kind of wasting forwards, and you're also searching from your deck, which will, whilst it's good consistency, it will also be detrimental later in the game because you are slowly thinning your deck. Obviously you can do this with Orphan as well, so you can play Orphan onto the field, gain 2 counters. We're coming full circle here. You go to attack phase, gains 2 counters. You can attack with Layle, and then in the attack, or as the attack's happening on the stack, use Magic Pot to put Orphan to the break zone, bring Orphan back onto the field, gain 2 more counters. On 2 forwards, you break those with the Doom counter check. That will also then give Layle his 3rd counter. You can then put his 3 Crystal Bearer counters into the break zone to then remove something from the game. As Layle says, choose 1 forward, remove it from the game. You can only use the ability whilst Layle is attacking. Now Layle is attacking, and he will be attacking up until a blocker is announced and the damage calculation has gone through. That entire time, they are still considered attacking. So even if your opponent does announce a blocker, and you have a means of bringing in a forward, say through Tama or something like that, he's still attacking, at which point you can then use his counters to remove something from the field if you can tech something in. Cool. I hope you enjoyed this week's weird and wonderful combos. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, and, you know, if you really enjoy what I'm doing, subscribe on Patreon. I'm going to be revamping my Patreon quite a bit in the next year. I'm going to be having polls in there so you guys can decide what sort of cards I look at, also the type of content I'll be making going forward, as well as having exclusive access to some of the content I'll be making as well. So for example, I will be composing some new music for my show. So there'll be like remixes of Final Fantasy tunes and whatnot, and you guys will have exclusive access to those songs. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.